Hello and welcome. Let us begin in southern Africa, where protests are heating up in Mozambique over election results. Mozambique's opposition leader, Venancio Mondlane, has called for crippling protests this week over the contested 9th of October elections that were won by the ruling Frelimo party. The Frelimo party has been in power since the country gained independence from Portugal in 1975. Taking to social media, Mondlane, a 50-year-old former radio presenter, said that from the 13th of November to the 15th, protesters were going to paralyze all activities in the country. Now, reports suggest that Mondlane has asked his supporters to demonstrate in the capital of Maputo, the provincial capitals, and along the country's borders and at the southern African country's ports. He has also urged truckers to stop bringing in goods from neighboring South Africa to the Maputo port. Now, the southern African nation has been rocked by violence ever since the Frelimo party's Daniel Chapo was announced the winner of the 9th of October elections with more than 71% of the votes. In contrast, Mondlane, who is the runner-up, won just 20% of the votes according to the election officials. The opposition, as well as several civil rights and Western observers, called the elections rigged as well as not free and fair. Human rights groups say that at least 30 people have been killed in 3 weeks of demonstrations over the contested election results. The opposition leader, Venancio Mondlane's call for crippling protests comes just days after Mozambique saw its biggest protest against the ruling party, which has been in power for nearly 50 years. Last week, thousands of opposition supporters marched through the capital city of Maputo. Many protesters threw rocks and set up barricades using burning tires and bins, while many others could be heard shouting slogans such as Frelimo must fall and power to the people.
We want change, that's all, just change. Nobody wants a war here. We're not looking to dismantle anything from anyone. You're looking at opportunists.
But the protest in Maputo on the 7th of November saw security forces, including heavily armed riot police and soldiers, flanked by armored vehicles, firing tear gas and dispersing the crowds by deploying dogs.
They can't do that. Things don't work like that. We are marching peacefully. We are not armed. We are not vandalizing anything. But the police are ruining everything.
And now the Mozambique police have been accused by human rights groups of using live ammunition against political protesters in the past. Last week, the defense minister of Mozambique, Gustavo Chume, also threatened to send in the military to halt the deadly protests that he said were aimed at overthrowing the government.
We would like to emphasize that demonstrations are violent. The role of the defense forces is to prevent them. We are called upon to react, and we react according to the acts perpetrated by the demonstrators, so as to be able to contain them. If the escalation of violence continues, there will be no alternative but to change our stance. The armed forces will have to protect the interests of the state.
Now, the protests on the 7th of November reportedly saw at least 3 people being killed and over 66 others injured. Ahead of the protests, in an interview with the media outlet Agency France Presse, or the AFP, Mondlane also noted that this was how the Frelimo party had been using brute force to silence dissenters for years.
They're not killings, they're murders. This has always been the way of Frelimo operates. I mean, first of all, Frelimo has never won an election since 1994. It's been 30 years that Frelimo has remained in power on the basis of force.
The country's Constitutional Council has requested clarification from the Electoral Commission on the discrepancies in the vote count. However, the Electoral Commission is yet to comment on the matter. While the ruling Frelimo has denied the vote-rigging allegations, the protests have continued to create chaos in the country, which has only increased the suffering of the citizens, who are calling for all the parties to sit down together and find a solution to the conflict.
I think the situation is terrible. For better or for worse, what is happening is harming the population. We are the ones who are suffering. I think the parties should sit down and talk for the good of the population, because it is the population that is suffering.
But it is not just the Mozambicans who are calling for a peaceful resolution. Nations, organizations, and people outside of Mozambique, including Pope Francis, have also called for a resolution to the deadly protests.
The news coming out of Mozambique is worrying. I invite everyone to dialogue, tolerance, and the tireless search for just solutions. Let us pray for the entire Mozambican population, so that the present situation does not cause them to lose faith in the path of democracy, justice, and peace.
Other Catholic groups have also gone ahead and further expressed their support to the protesters. Reports suggest that members of the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference, or the SACBC, have expressed their solidarity with the colleagues in Mozambique. The SACBC members, which include Catholic bishops from Botswana, Eswatini, and South Africa, expressed their disapproval of the repressive response to the peaceful protesters. With more protests lined up in Mozambique, the larger question remains: will the government listen to the demands of the opposition? Now, to discuss more on this, we have with us Fredson Gulengu, who is a Mozambican political analyst who is joining us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, what are the main grievances raised by opposition's Venancio Mondlane and this regarding the alleged rigging of the 9th of October elections, and how credible are these claims based on the available evidence?
Well, if I understood correctly, you want to understand about the credibility of the claims of Venancio Mondlane. Well, I think there is already a long, a 30 years history in Mozambique of accusations of election rigging and of electoral processes being controlled by hands outside the organs that are supposed to manage these processes. So there is a 30 years history of discredibility or lack of credibility in relation to the functioning of electoral bodies in Mozambique, including the courts, the police, and the highest court institution, which is the Constitutional Council. So because of that, it's very easy to for one to claim that there is election rigging. So apart from that, and people have seen through social media lots of acts of interference into the process. For example, people voting already or stuffing votes into the ballot box, pre-voted bulletins on behalf of the ruling party, mostly. And the people have also experienced situations where there's discrepancies in terms of the number of people registered for the 3 elections, because these were 3 simultaneous elections. It's the presidential, parliamentary, and also provincial. So there is a very big discrepancy in terms of the number of people who voted. So there is, in fact, some credibility to the claims of Venancio Mondlane and his supporters, as I said, because there is history of interference with the democratic processes in Mozambique, but there were also facts on the ground that prove that these elections cannot be considered as free, fair, and transparent, or if I might say, democratic.
Right. Right. And Fredson, how significant is the support for Mondlane's call for protests? I mean, we've seen huge support. And what potential impact could these demonstrations have on Mozambique's political stability? And what is the impact on daily life of the citizens?
Well, I will start from the end of your question, from the second question on the impact on the daily lives. I mean, it's clear, as you see, Mozambicans have not been able to live a normal life for the past months because it has been a month after these elections were held. And since the beginning of these protests, the economy has not been able to run as properly. Most shops have been closing one day and opening the other. I mean, the state institutions also have been operating normally, and I also believe that this is going to continue like that. I would also like to add that the border between Mozambique and South Africa was closed. And this is a very important border because Mozambique relies substantially in the import of goods that come from South Africa, even for the daily life of the Mozambicans, of Mozambican families. So socially, it has been complicated. People have lost their lives. You mentioned around, if I understood correctly, around 60 to so people who have lost their lives. There's a number of people who are injured, and the society is divided. There are two centers of power in Mozambique today. One center, which is the de facto power, that resides, in my understanding, in the hands of Mondlane, and the other center is the Juris power, which resides in the hands of Frelimo government. And Mondlane has been able to exercise power firmly. Yeah. But in terms of the political changes, I think this is a major development for Mozambique. No demonstration against electoral results have ever reached this dimension, this magnitude. Before, the center of contestations were on the countryside, but now they've moved to the urban areas.
Yes. Fredson, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Thank you for being with us on Firstpost Africa and for your valued insights there.
Thank you.